The early 1990s didn't just change music, it rewired it completely. One minute, metal was ruling the world. Big riffs, bigger hair, well, not always. Stadium tours, and a music industry built on excess and spectacle. And then, almost overnight, everything flipped. Grunge came roaring out of the Pacific Northwest, raw, stripped down, angry, introspective, and suddenly the rules were different. Image mattered less. Authenticity mattered a lot more, and the way bands were signed, marketed, and even understood by fans changed forever. Today's band spotlight digs into that exact moment of rupture, the shift from metal to grunge in the early 1990s. We're talking key players, pivotal dates, and the cultural pressure points that made the transition inevitable. But we're also looking at what changed behind the scenes, how radio, MTV, much music labels, and touring dynamics evolved almost in real time. My guest today is musician Sean Kelly, someone who lived through that era with his eyes open, watching styles collide, scenes rise and fall, and careers get shaped by a wave no one fully saw coming. This isn't a nostalgia trip. Well, it kind of is. It's a conversation about disruption, reinvention, and what happens when an entire industry has to let go of one identity to make room for another. Let's get into it. This is the Backstage Kitchen Podcast. By the end of the 1980s, rock music was bigger than ever, and for many listeners, emptier than ever. Metal dominated the charts and airwaves. Bands like Motley Crue, Poison, Def Leppard, and Bon Jovi weren't just successful, they were institutions. Arena tours, polished production, MTV-ready visuals, don't forget Much Music, and songs engineered for maximum impact. Little side note, on Def Leppard Hysteria, there's so many guitar layers on that song, I think they probably had to pump in extra power from outside nuclear plants. But from a polished end came at a cost. Rock had become predictable in a way, a little risk adverse, and increasingly disconnected from the lives of its audience. Now, not all the audience, because let's be honest, when Poison, the Poison song "Nothing But a Good Time" comes on, I think millions still rocked out. But what had now become dangerous kind of felt rehearsed, and I can relate to that. Van Halen was a little dangerous. You know, they came out with the attitude of "lock up your daughters, we're coming to town," and now everything kind of seemed like a Disney polish. So as the 90s approached, the cultural mood shifted. The Cold War was ending. Remember the Berlin Wall coming down? Maybe not, maybe you're too young. I remember it. I was in grade 12. Economic anxiety was rising. Cynicism replaced optimism. Not for me. I was still a rocker. I was still dumb and wet behind the ears. Because in 1990, I turned 19 and I was ready to do, party hardy. So a generation raised on layoffs, divorce, and media wasn't looking for escapism. It was looking for honesty. Rock hadn't caught up yet. The gap between spectacle and sincerity created pressure, and pressure eventually breaks something open. Now, I want to see a little side note on this. This is specific to a lot of young kids in Generation X. So those that don't know Generation X, we're that little encapsulated group that were born between 1965 and 1980. Now, the older Gen Xers, we grew up on Van Halen. We grew up on Boston. We grew up on Journey. We also cut our teeth on Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, a lot of these new album bands as well. But in my own professional or amateur opinion, it was the younger Gen X's that really, really embraced the grunge scene, which I'm about to break into right now. It seemed like a bit of a divide depending on where you were in that spectrum, because I was still raised with, rock and rolla. I was raised with "We're Not Gonna Take It," "I Wanna Rock," those fun party anthems. But I think it was the real push of those older Gen Xers, younger Gen Xers, that really, really encapsulate that microcosm that burst grunge open. So let's talk about that. So the break came in the place of an industry that wasn't watching closely. Seattle was isolated, far from LA, from the glam pipeline, and don't call it glam, according to Shaw. And I get that. We're going to talk about that in a little bit about some of his books, my guest. And of course, it was away from New York's label ecosystem. Bands were chasing trends. They were reacting to boredom, frustration, and they were creatively suffocating. They fused punk's urgency, metal's weight, and lyrics that weren't trying to impress, just survive. In 1989, Nirvana released Bleach. It barely registered commercially, but it documented a sound that refused to be cleaned up. At the time, it felt underground, local, disposable, but it wouldn't stay that way. On September 24th, 1991, Nirvana released Nevermind. The label expected moderate alternative success. What happened instead was seismic. Within months, Nevermind knocked Dangerous by Michael Jackson out of the #1 spot on the Billboard charts, a symbolic changing of the guard, if you will. Michael Jackson was unstoppable in the 80s and the early 90s. Just imagine, this little gritty man from Seattle knocks him and his huge writing team, production crew. Well, actually, I think MJ wrote a lot of his own songs. So Smells Like Teen Spirit didn't sound polished at all. By today's standards, looking back, it was a little glossed over, but not for 1991. The guitars were distorted, the vocals were kind of buried in the mix, and the lyrics refused to explain themselves. Difficult to understand to this day, but yet it connected instantly. Not because it was catchy, actually it was really catchy, because it felt real, all right? And I remember it coming out. I thought it was just, to tell you how unprepared metal people were for grunge. I liked Teen Spirit. It was the other songs I didn't like. Teen Spirit had that backbone, that guitar riff, and that nonsense that I really bought into. Grunge wasn't just a new style, it was a new emotional contract. These songs weren't about fantasy and excess. I'm looking at you, Van Halen. They were about confusion, alienation, addiction, and self-doubt. Pearl Jam released 10, emotionally open and grounded. Soundgarden followed with Bad Motor Finger, huge album, blending heaviness with complexity. Not to say that there wasn't complex metal albums. I'm looking at you, Queensryche. In 1992, Alice in Chains released Dirt, a monumental album that documented pain instead of romanticizing it. These weren't party records, they were confrontations, and the audience leaned in. Grunge didn't just challenge the sound of rock, it dismantled its image. Hair metal, don't call it hair metal, was theatrical. And so was a lot of power metal. Look at Iron Maiden. Iron Maiden is one of the most theatrical bands out there. Grunge was kind of the opposite of that. Grunge was the meh, to quote Lisa Simpson. It was, we're here, this is what we do. If you don't like it, go F yourself. So flannel replaced spandex. Stillness replaced choreography. Solos became optional. I hated that. Rock stopped pretending it was invincible. The industry didn't understand grunge, but it recognized momentum. Record labels flooded Seattle. Bands were signed based on geography. MTV and Much Music Shift, radio formatted. Remember the end of Headbangers Ball? First it was condensed to a half hour, and then it was see you later. Authenticity became marketable, and grunge went from anti-commercial reaction to dominant commercial sound almost overnight. The contradiction would eventually take its toll. By the mid-1990s, the movement had begun to fracture. Stone Temple Pilots blurred genre lines. Smashing Pumpkins expanded the sound into something more expansive and layered. Then in 1994, Kurt Cobain died. It wasn't just the loss of a musician. It felt like the emotional endpoint of an era. Grunge didn't kill metal, but it did force rock to tell the truth again. It reshaped how artists were signed, how albums were produced, and how credibility was measured. It proved that imperfection could be powerful, and that honesty, even when uncomfortable, could move an entire culture. For a brief, volatile moment, rock turned inward, and everything changed. So that's my take on the artist spotlight this week on grunge. I was right in the middle of it. I grew up as a thrash guy. I loved New Album. Iron Maiden took me under its wing. And then it was, crazy, quirky bands like Anthrax. I loved Anthrax, and I've said that from the show before. And I also loved Canadian bands like the Killer Dwarfs. I liked a quirky, tongue-in-cheek attitude. So glam, although I didn't put it in my Walkman in high school, I had an appreciation for it, especially the guitar-oriented bands like White Lion and Vito Bratta. I mean, just a legendary band musically, and not everyone could get behind the lyrics, and I completely understand that. So let's talk to a man's coming up, my friend Sean Kelly, who lived through that moment. We're very similar in age, and he was actually part of the on-stage element of this. He was cutting his teeth, tuning his axe, and making things happen at a time when the world that he knew opened up in a totally different direction. So coming up next, we're going to talk with Sean Kelly and a little bit of rock and roll. Hey, and welcome back to the Backstage Kitchen podcast. Fritz here. And my guest today is Toronto-based guitarist, songwriter, producer, and author Sean Kelly. Originally from North Bay, Ontario, he has built a career spanning hard rock stages, pop tours, and studio work, widely recognized for its guitar work with Nelly Furtado, plus Canadian rock staples Coney Hatch and Arron. Kelly is also the founder and frontman of Crash Kelly and has a history with Helix. Beyond performance, he's an educator and a noted chronicler of Canadian heavy metal music through his books Metal on Ice, Tales from Hard Rock and Heavy Metal Heroes, and his most recent book, Don't Call It Hair Metal, Art in the Excess of 80s Rock. So welcome to the show, Sean. Thanks so much for being here, brother.
Thank you for having me, Richard. Pleasure.
Right on. So we chatted a little bit before the show started, and you and I are of a similar age, probably a similar background, and probably gone to similar concerts growing up. Before we kind of get into your music career, I want to talk a little bit about sort of your first experiences going to a live stage. I remember my first show, the first time I recognized music as being the coolest thing on the planet. I think I was 10 years old, and I was at a car show, and that was very common in small towns. The car shows come around, and they have cover bands. They're playing stuff, and there was a band there that was doing all Rod Stewart. And I knew Rod Stewart at 10 years old because my aunt loved Rod Stewart. I remember looking at this band and going, oh my God, it's Rod Stewart. I didn't know at that time that, it was a cover band. And that was the first time I kind of went, wow. And I remember arguing with my aunt for 5 minutes after the show going, yeah, Rod Stewart was playing at the Forum in Halifax, which was, crazy. You wouldn't have been playing a car show. But that was my first experience with music. And it set the stage for me to get into and do all things rock. So did you have a similar experience? Was there that epiphany moment?
Well, yeah, it really, I started to really get into music at the dawn of kind of the commercial era of hard rock, right? So around 1983, Quiet Riot, Def Leppard, those bands kind of coming out, Aldo Nova, bands like that. So that commercial hard rock sound grabbed me, and I was very much into it. But the band that really flipped the switch for me was Twisted Sister. That combination of the visual, the anthemic nature of the songs, I didn't know what it was, but I knew I wanted to be it.
Yeah, no.
And so I love that. And, that's when I knew I wanted to be a musician. I didn't know how, I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I needed a guitar.
Yeah.
So that's what prompted me to harangue my parents to get my first guitar for sure, which I still have. And
that's awesome.
Yeah, so that's definitely it. It really all begins and ends with Twisted Sister. And I'm still a huge fan. And many years later, I actually got to do a musical, Dee Snider's Rock and Roll Christmas Tale, and work with Dee and become friends. So to me, that was amazing. But the moment where I really believed I could do it was when I went to see my first concert, and that was Helix and Honeymoon Suite, North Bay Memorial Gardens, 1985. And seeing that, and I talk about it in the Metal on Ice book, but meeting those guys and getting a chance to actually, see the backstage machinations and how things get set up and watching the set, and then seeing the concert, and then realizing this is every bit as good as anything that's coming from south of the border.
100%.
That was pivotal, to actually connect these bands with the videos and the songs on the radio to towns that I had played hockey in. Like, it all seemed possible.
My second concert, to add to what that excitement that you just described to me, was Loverboy with a very young Bryan Adams opening up.
Here's my Loverboy guitar, my Paul Dean signature guitar.
I love that. I saw a post on your Instagram about that. That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Very cool. And his daughter's quite musical as well, is she not? A gentleman from Honeymoon Suite.
Derry,
Derry.
Leah. Leah.
Leah, yeah. So
She's
it's
wonderful. Yep.
interesting. It's interesting how it all comes together. But yeah, that was my first concert, like first rock concert that was This Is the Band. And, interesting side note for Twisted Sister. In grade 8, I was one of the few that got to witness the birth almost of that packaged rebellion of Dee Snider and the gang when they opened up for Maiden for the Power Slave
Power
tour. Like
Slave tour. Yeah.
it was like that's one of those iconic, when did you see Elvis moments sort of thing. And being there, I was totally in awe. It was all within that first few years, right? So yeah, I can completely relate to that. So getting into bands, and what was your first guitar, by the way? I'll tell you mine if you tell me yours.
Yeah, my first guitar, it was a pretty nondescript Japanese double
Yeah,
cutaway, semi-hollow body guitar that my dad got at a pawn shop. He got it for me for Christmas, and it's funny, I, have a new book coming out, sorry, I'm probably jumping ahead here, but
no, 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 I love it.
it relates, called, Battle Axes, Hard Rock and History of Pointy Guitars, and
Wicked.
and I talk about that first guitar I got, like, with the double cutaway, and it wasn't a pointy guitar, I really wanted a Flying V,
Yeah,
but this is what I got. So anyway, that was my first one. I still don't know where it's from.
I similar. You know how back then I was so ignorant to knowing how you would get an instrument. My mind at 14 had not clicked. There's music stores yet for whatever reason in my small little brain. So we went to the Sears catalog as we always did, and
Yeah, man.
they had these harmony guitars, right?
That's what I
So
wanted, the Harmony Flying V
totally, you
from the
remember
Sears
that?
catalog. Yeah.
Absolutely, that's what I wanted. Now I didn't get mine either. I got some, I don't know, some backcountry Strat ripoff that was heavier than hell,
Yeah.
heavier than a Gibson, and it was called a Vantech. I don't even think you can Google the name and it will come up. It's not even a subsidiary of one of the big brands. But I love that guitar, and it was cream colored because of Jimi Hendrix, and then of course Yngwie Malmsteen. It just came out.
Yeah.
Now, I couldn't play anything like that, but I remember the very first thing I wanted to learn is so cliche. I wanted to learn Stairway to Heaven. So those first 4 barred notes are in my mind forever. That was like my introduction to guitar.
Yeah.
And it was great, and I loved it, and I played the crap out of that thing, and then about 6 months later, I realized everyone on my block played guitar, and they were better, so I switched to drums. But anyways, that's how it works, man. I think a lot of drummers out there, 9 out of 10 of them are failed guitar players. So anyways, that's my story. So I love comparing notes on that. Okay, so when we initially, as you moved along and you got interested in bands, I'm assuming you took a similar path as myself. You played with your friends and your buddies, and you formed bands, and you might have put on your own shows or did talent shows at high school. How did that all come together for you?
Yeah, exactly as you said, I kinda moved up from that first no-name brand. My parents saw I was playing it enough that I got my first proper electric guitar, which was a Series A
I
guitar
remember
that
it.
was a Canadian company that
Yeah.
imported guitars from
Yep.
Korea, I believe
Yep.
from Samick, I think anyway. But, had the locking Floyd Rose and the
Totally.
Super Strat,
Yep.
and from there, my first high school band, like that was my first time being on stage. Grade 10, and I'm playing with my friends, and, we're already thinking about the stage show. We'll all wear matching lumber jackets. That'll be it. Before the irony that grunge would come along and destroy all
You
the
were ahead of
fun.
your time, actually. You're ahead of your time, buddy.
Yeah, yeah. But, the North Bay dinner jacket.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so, and that was it, and that was such a wonderful moment, and I still get excited thinking about how I felt waiting for rehearsals on the
Yeah.
weekend. Not being able to concentrate at school, just thinking and daydreaming, and soon and the wonder of meeting a guy who played drums and knew a drum beat that sounded like a Quiet Riot song, or my friend Jeff Van Dusdorp had keyboards, and he could play Love Walks In by Van Halen. I was like, "Oh my god, that sounds like it." And then we get up and play and see the reaction, and so from there, I knew I was hooked, and the next step was, okay, well, now and I'm reading Cream and Circus and Hit Parader and Guitar World, and I know I have to play in clubs. You play in clubs before you play in arenas, so I would go down to the local record store and find want ads, and eventually I started playing with guys much older than me,
Right.
and
Yeah.
that was my first experience. The next year, I was playing in bars, underage, sneaking in and playing in the bars with great local musicians who, mentored me, and all the while thinking, well, what's next? What do you do after you've done this? Well, I knew you had to write your own songs, and I would look at the back of records and I'd say, well, they're on record labels, and the record company, it says here, Warner Music, Scarborough, Ontario. That's near Toronto. Well, I got to move to a bigger city. And how do I do that? Well, I had some good guidance. Initially I wanted to go to GIT in Los Angeles. That was a big plan. Well, first of all, I was going to drop out, join a cover band, and go on the road when I was 16.
Yeah, of
And
course.
my parents said, "Well, maybe don't do that. What if you try this?" And suggested, doing a post-secondary music program. So I kind of crammed and I learned I already was into classical guitar because I loved Yngwie Malmsteen and Randy Rhoads and Rick Emmett. And I remember reading Rick Emmett's articles and going, "Oh man, I should learn a couple of different styles, I should do that." So I set my sights on doing classical guitar at U of T, and I had a wonderful guitar teacher who kicked my ass enough, but also inspired me enough to kind of get my chops up to audition and get in. And that brought me to Toronto when I was 18.
Wow. And
And
it
with a
changed.
student loan that I could, actually afford to live.
Yeah. Well, you're in the perfect, discipline to pay back loans when you're a musician because the money just starts flowing
Oh,
right away,
dude, as
right?
soon as you're done, the gigs just kept rolling in. That led me to the next part of my life. But anyway,
Yeah, exactly. So, okay, so you did that, and what's great about that too, I'm sure, when you hear musician, you don't always hear about discipline can read music moving forward. You hear a lot about people who are self-taught and can write. And I knew musicians who are technically proficient and ones that are just ear. Like my buddy Rob plays bass, great bass player, can't read a note, but if you play something for him, he'll do it note for note
yeah.
and play it over again. Having that discipline on top of that definitely opened up some other things later in your life, and we'll probably get into that too, obviously, with the musicals and then writing scores, which is something you're doing right now with, I think it's an independent project that's coming up that you're doing, movie scores for, yes?
Yeah,
Are you
well, I'm actually working on a documentary right
okay,
now.
that's right,
I don't think
documentary.
it's a totally top secret thing, but it's called
Okay.
Gods of Radio. Maybe you're
Okay.
getting an exclusive, but it's about
Hey.
how CanCon
Yeah.
influenced and essentially kickstarted the Canadian recording industry.
Wow.
So a host of 60s, 70s, 80s rock icons
Oh
from
my god.
Canada talking about, when CanCon came into effect, how that changed things.
Which happened, I think, what, late '60s, early '70s, is that correct? If my time frame.
Yeah, that's right. Early 70s. Yeah.
And
And
it protected our heritage, and I don't think we would have had your first book in the degree that we did if it wasn't for that. Would you agree with that?
I definitely would. Like, you do hear people talk about how, it doesn't really foster competition or, you know, bands should make it on their own merit. But I think especially timely these days with what's happening
Mm,
south of the border, you know,
100%.
we were, you can't help. It's like, what did Trudeau say? You're sleeping beside an elephant and expecting not to, not to
Yeah,
to influence you. You're gonna
100%.
feel it. You're gonna
You
feel every
are,
little move.
without
So
question.
we were basically, that's why so many Canadian artists had to go to the United States to try and make it. There were studios here. There were, it was hard to get on the air. Like, we were so influenced by American culture.
Mm.
This provided a chance. And what I say is that it actually improves competition because it brings more people to the table. And all of a sudden, you're realizing these Canadians are every good as the big boys down south.
I agree, and, I've heard the same arguments for and against, but most of my friends and again, I have friends in the radio business too, they said, "Yeah, we would have been squashed by the dollars," and that's what at the end of the day, it's about marketing dollars, and we would not have been able to compete, and the evidence is still there today with the amount of American artists, but because of CanCon, as a young guy, I found Triumph, I found the Killer Dwarves, I found, all these great Canadian bands. Now, Triumph obviously went on and had a lot of success in the States, and the Dwarfs did too. In fact, Russ will tell you they probably have bigger audiences down in Texas than they would say, in some places in Canada, right? But
100%, but they get their start in
yeah,
Canada because there are
totally.
studios, there are
Hmm.
record companies here now
Yes,
that are
yes,
trying to satisfy the demand for all these artists who now have a shot, who
yes,
know that they
yes.
have a shot?
Yeah, and so that was my defense to it, and I think it's proven itself. So that's interesting. I look forward to that, brother. So
Mhm.
you're doing the score, the soundtrack for
I'm an
that?
associate producer on the documentary as well. It's been like about
Very cool.
6 years in the making. A
Nice.
wonderful cast of, music industry professionals, film professionals working on
Yeah.
this. Yeah. It's called Gods of Radio, and it'll be out later this year.
That's awesome. I can't wait, man. So,
Yeah.
you mind if we kind of swing back to the back to your first kind of like you felt like you're gonna make it because you've been in Toronto, you've finished from U of T, you're shaping in bands. What was that? Now, you've gone on. You were signed with Crash Kelly, and you did that first big tour with Alice Cooper. But right before that, was there a moment that you were like, "All right, I'm making it." You're playing with someone. You're in a professional band. You're making barely enough to live, which is what any professional band could ever
Yeah.
hope for. Well, tell me about that moment if you don't mind.
Well, yeah, what happened, for me, when I got to Toronto, I was like I said, I was going to university, so I was, on the campus at the Faculty of Music in Toronto, so you're surrounded by musicians, and I happened to run into 2 brothers who had been there from New Jersey, and I thought that was so exotic because
Mm.
Skid Row was from New
Yeah,
Jersey
yeah,
and
yeah,
Bon Jovi, and I was like,
yeah,
"Whoa," and they
yeah.
looked great, they had amazing hair, they're good-looking guys. And we were kind of the long hair guys at school, right? Along with, 2 brothers, Steve and Brad Tatchuk. One's a prof at UCLA, play guitar prof, and the other one's a conductor at Niagara Symphony now, but the long hair guys kind of found
Yeah.
each other, right?
Good company. Yeah, of course, we all do.
But, so myself and these 2 brothers, the Tetro brothers, we got together and we found a drummer, Rob Tarian, and put a band together, and pretty quickly, I knew I wasn't afraid to pick up a phone and get gigs, and I had been doing that in North Bay, right? And even my first original band in North Bay, we got to play at arena show. We opened for Colin James and Wild Tea in the Spirit at
That's
the
wicked.
hometown arena. So and that gig was funny because I'll tell you, we showed up with nothing. Like little combo amps and our drums and everything, but they're like, "Where's your front of house and lights?"
Yeah, you got a back
Pardon?
line?
I got that gig because I was the president of my students' council in high school, and I promised the promoter that I would push the tickets on the morning announcements at school.
Nice.
Yeah, yeah,
Nice.
so I was hustling. I didn't know
That
what the hell I was
yeah.
doing.
But yeah, you didn't even know it would call it hustling then. You were like, "I want this gig. I
I
wanna do
want
this."
this to
Yeah.
happen, and
Yeah,
I've gotta
totally.
try, and I've
Yeah.
gotta ask, and I wasn't afraid. So, anyway,
I love it.
long story short, I would phone, and I always wanted to play a place called the Gasworks in Toronto, famous rock club. So
I
I
remember the
phoned and I
Gasworks.
phoned and I phoned, and eventually Donnie Blaze, who is a very well-known promoter here in Toronto, he just said, "Okay, listen, there's a band that's on Anthem Records called Psycho Circus. You can open up for them." I was like, "What? We're opening up for a signed band? Like, this is amazing."
Yeah.
And we'd go do that gig, and we'd played a couple of little gigs around Toronto, but we go do that gig, and that night, a lady comes up to me, lovely woman named Margaret Zima, who was not a music industry professional, but wanted to be. "I wanna manage you guys, and by the way, this is Jamie Stewart from The Cult,
Wow.
and he's a producer," and Jamie liked the band, and we ended up cutting a demo, so within a year, I'm in Toronto working with this multi-platinum rock star, Jamie, who was a great guy, showed us so much and taught us so much, and we cut a demo, and all of a sudden, "Yeah, man, I'm going into Warner tomorrow, I'll play the demo." I'm going, "What? You can
I
go
know.
just go talk to people?" And,
Crazy.
yeah, I gave it to EMI Publishing, and anyway, all this stuff, I was so excited, but at the same time, things are changing, and the way that I play is gonna be not so cool pretty soon, right? And we were kind of a little bit trying to probably do the Jane's Addiction thing, like,
Right.
it was things didn't happen like this, like, things are
Mm.
changing. There are bands like Saigon Kick
Yeah.
who had previously been hard rock, considered hard rock, but were a little more alternative, and,
Mhm. Mhm.
so it was kind of that in-between period, but I soon realized we're not cool. My cowboy boots aren't cool anymore. That guy's wearing Doc Martens. Why does he have those boots?
Yeah.
What about this jacket? My hair should be not like this. It shouldn't be so big. It should be flatter.
Flat and kinda all one length at your shoulders, sorta
Yeah,
like
so
that. Yeah, yeah.
things were changing, but I mean, it was fun, and really, we didn't really have the songs to do anything, but we tried, and it was heartbreaking when the other guys wanted to move on, but shortly thereafter, I was living in an apartment, I heard this amazing voice, and it was a singer from a band called Images in Vogue, a guy
Yes.
named Dale Martindale.
Yes.
I went up and I knocked on the apartment upstairs, I didn't know them, but I said, I forced my way into this band, this partnership or project, and we ended up kicking out the other guy, poor guy, kicked him out, and Dale and I formed another band called 69
Wow.
Duster, and that was
Very cool.
another learning curve because now I'm actually in a band with a guy who's been there and played
Yeah.
arenas and
Yeah.
had a record deal, and that was another formative thing. We moved to Vancouver, had EMI Publishing gave us a little bit of money to make demos, and you're just constantly meeting people and trying to push and
But you had connections to the machine is like what I say, and I've never been in the machine, if you will. Like I think Nikki Sixx explained that I don't know, it was one of his books or whatever. He's like, you get in the machine, a little bit of money comes your way, you churn something together, you spit something out, it goes in the machine does its magical thing, either you get spit out or you get spit to a different level of where you're gonna go. Does that make sense?
yeah, yeah, like, I mean, at that point, the machine was still a thing for sure. I didn't really get inside it too much, but
Mm,
but
sure.
little bits, little tastes of it
Yeah, yeah,
where
yeah.
I'm seeing how it works and there's a lot of nice people in the Canadian music industry, and they took the time to
100%.
kind of explain what you're doing right, what you're doing wrong, and a lot of people when I was young, it used to hurt when you make a demo and they say, "Well, it's not really good," or "That's not bad, but you gotta write ten songs that are better than that," and I was like, "Oh, but this is genius. Can't you hear what I'm trying to say?" And,
Yeah, yeah, totally, totally, I get it.
but that's what's I take away as being invaluable from that time. That was, like, all an apprenticeship.
Yeah, and hubris of youth is a big part of that too, because we're kind of almost prisoners of our own life up to that point, right? So this is the stuff that we're influenced on, we're rocking it out, and we're saying this is it. But then you have people going, no, 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 it's not what we're doing. It's like, what are you talking about? I just put it right there. It's gold. Come on, let's do it. I get it. Okay, I'll close my mouth, open my ears. No, I get it. Listen, as a young apprentice too, you go through a cocky period where you start to understand food for what it is. You start to understand. You start to be able to put things together and have the confidence in it. And sometimes, and I'm not saying this happened to you, but it did for me. I was like, there was this 4-year period where I was insufferable because I was going to be the next Gordon Ramsay. Well, Gordon wasn't really a big then, but his mentor, Marco White, was. So I was like, yeah, I'm the king. But I was in little Halifax, Nova Scotia, and I hadn't yet to have my ego demolished, which happened appropriately in the next year, which was great for me because I was able to pull back and say, okay, now I want to learn how to cook, if that makes sense. Yeah. Of course. Of course. Yeah. 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 It's humbling, I get it, man. Yeah, I get it. I agree. Very cool. Nice. Totally. I agree that, there's an old saying, success has many fathers or mothers, if you will. And it's interesting in when you're saying that, I'm thinking back, I can only think back to my own. Not because, I'm trying to make it about me, but I can identify with what you're saying. And a lot of that is experience. Sometimes we don't know what we're supposed to know. And then that's the reality. And I'm the same way. Like I've pulled back one of the last restaurants that I kinda did catch and release, like, opened it up. I opened it up to the team. It was scary because here I was 40 something and all my team were 20 something, young bucks. They could outlast me on the line all day long. But I said, "I can't compete with these kids with energy, but what I can do is, temper their mind for realistic expectations," and that's all I had to do, man. It was just it's like a real manager. You're wrangling the ideas and trying to make so that the tires aren't spinning. So yeah, I completely relate to what you're saying, Sean. It's especially when it's your own baby. But what was cool about that whole scenario and that album, by the way, you spoke a lot about personal experiences. Like I don't remember the exact line, but it's something about you had a fifth of gin and go having some drinks with the boys, and that's real, and that connects with people everywhere because everywhere in Canada, people have gone out and pre-partied somewheres, and it was those uplifting rock songs. Not from a, I'm not saying they were from a bygone era, not at all, but you were reflecting on those times because they were really important to you. Am I wrong? That's the one. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sorry, 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 sorry. Yeah, right. Well, hey, yeah, yeah, I get it. Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, of course. Nice, nice. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yes. No, and again, you pointed out another similarity between my business. Every time I do an event, I used to do a lot of work with Canadian Music Week for Music Nova Scotia. So, that big week in May where everybody gets together to showcases out the wazoo. And I was asked from Music Nova Scotia to ship up a bunch of oysters and lobsters and do this thing at the Rib. So I would do that. But what was interesting, I was meeting people that were kind of outside of my social circle at home, and then I started flying up to do events in Toronto and other things. So it's like every single time you're doing an event, whether it's a win or a lose on paper, money wise. I didn't do these Toronto events to make big money. It was just a neat opportunity. I love music, right? So yeah, they kind of always add to it. But yeah, I'll have to re-listen to the first album again, brother, and get dig deeper into those tunes. And thanks for clarifying that for me. I appreciate it, brother. Yeah. Okay. So with the obviously you toured with Cooper and with Gilby Clarke, and you had, I mean, goodness, guitar player from the Cult. Is that who it was? Who was produces? Or was he the bass player or the guitar player? Bass player. Yeah, yeah. Right, right. But boom, you're in the mix. Like you're in the culture of who's making decisions and who knows somebody. And really, at the end of the day, consistency is, I think, is more valuable than talent. You're very talented, by the way. I'm not saying that, but it's like people need to know you're going to show up and put up instead of being some cocky hotshot. That, like, how many musicians out there are geniuses but got stymied, and you probably know a few just off the top of your head, but we don't have to get into that. But you know what I mean? Listen, I get it. Totally. Totally. Mhm. Yes. 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 That's good advice for all of us. You know what? You do, man. You're actually at your album ready, if I may. But, we joked earlier when we were emailing each other about the radio face. I joke all the time about that, you know what I mean? Because I'm not the handsomest cook in the world. There's young, pretty guys out there and girls that look better than me, and there's some hotshot cooks in there. I'm not even the best cook in Halifax, let alone, but I have the tools to be able to pull it together, make your event good. And to the people coming to your event, I'm the best chef they've ever seen. And it's like when you're playing, I mean, and I'm not, an old mentor told me once, a seven is as good as a 10. And I said, what do you mean by that? Seven's never as good as a 10. You get a 10 out of 10 on a project. He says, well, how is everything subjective, isn't it? It's like, how many people do you got to pull together so they all agree that you're a 10 out of 10? If you're pulling sevens or eights, you're excellent. You're really good at what you do. And people really, most of them aren't educated enough or have the background enough to even be able to understand, what could be better, what could be worse. Does that make sense without sounding too convoluted? Yeah. Yep. Totally. Totally. Yes. Yeah. 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 You got to take your lumps. You really do. Right. Like, yeah. Conan O'Brien recently with that new John Candy documentary came out. I don't know if you watched it or not, but wasn't that great? And the scene where he's talking about John's going down, I think he's Harvard alum, and Conan's taking him around campus and showing him around, and he says to him, "So, kid, what do you think you're gonna do when you get out of here?" And Conan goes, "Oh, I think I'm gonna try comedy." He's like, "Kid, you don't try comedy. You either do it or you get the hell out." And it's the same thing with musicianship, the same thing with cooking. You got to be dedicated, because I was in 3 years before I felt like I could do anything right. And that's the honest truth, right? So back into the 3 out of 10, I guess, yeah, absolutely. I guess it's like this. If I did this amazing meal and a Michelin star chef came in, he would say that's at 7. But if I did this same amazing meal to corporate clients that were hiring me to do it, they'd be like, wow, this is a 10 out of 10, hit it out of the park. So it's that whole subjectivity. Still doesn't mean it's not good. It just means there's different tiers and different levels of culinary expertise. There's, like diner food, which is great. Don't get me wrong. Give me a roast beef sandwich, a good gravy and peas, I'm down. But then there's, Michelin star stuff, and where every single piece is handcrafted to a ridiculous degree. So can we talk about your books for a minute? So what was the inspiration of your first book? That came out at 13, and you kind of alluded to that earlier. It's almost like a journey through time, if you will, about some of your favorite bands. And you obviously you quoted Rick Emmett quite a bit, and I love the fact that you mentioned the Killer Dwarfs, because those guys don't get enough recognition in Canada, and they're some of the nicest people I've ever met. They really are. Jerry's great. Nice, nice. Handful. Yeah, I know. Yeah, totally. And it's regional too. Being from the Maritimes, often we wouldn't even get some of the bands from Ontario. It was a real special deal. Like if like so you remember Harem Scarum? They're still around. Great guys. They're awesome. Great guys. I love them. Pete Pete put out one of my favorite albums that no one's ever heard, and it's Fairground. Do you remember the Fairground album? Amazing stuff. Yeah, with Mike, yeah, who I've become friends with over the years. So when we saw in the paper, we recording artist Harem Scarum coming to the Misty Moon, we're like, whoa, God, you got to go there, right? Because it was something other than the cover band, like the Doobie Brothers guys that used to go around, the Tres Hombres that used to play around. We had, and which were great because in a small market like Halifax, that was the closest we were going to get to ZZ Top in 1985. That was the reality. So, yeah, it's interesting. It was really cool for me to read that book, and I wrote along with you. And because I think maybe we're similar in ages, I felt the exact same way. I remember meeting the Spoons behind a hotel when I was like 14 years old, and we all had this crush on Sandy, the bass player, because she was so gorgeous. And they were super cool with us. Like, they were almost teasing us. They're like, "Oh, you guys want to go on tour with us?" And I'm like 15. Yeah, yeah, of course I can go on tour with you. I'm legal. And they're just laughing. They were just so cool because I remember what that was like. But your next book kind of hit a bit more on uh, the title anyways, talking about hair bands. Don't call it hair metal or hair bands, because it was kind of almost used in some circles as a derogatory term. And a lot of bands and us old metalheads will tell you that there are certain bands that people label as hair metal that is not. One being like, say, Guns N' Roses. I never ever thought of Guns N' Roses as a hair band or a glam band in the 80s. They were a hard hitting rock band in my mind, similar to like the Stones or what have you. Couldn't define them. You know what I mean? Yeah, like, totally. Yes. Totally. That's what we do. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Right. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. No, I get it. You're pointing out the obvious. Yeah. It's like, relax, man. Yeah, exactly. Well, I like how you broke it down into like 2-year increments, really, and kind of follows through that whole decade, which is great because that was my favorite time for music, to be honest with you, because it was uplifting, it was fun music, it was party music. Some of it was serious. I mean, we had the Queensryches of the world, and we had a lot of the prog stuff that talked about certain things, but still had a pop sensibility, if you will. But yeah, it was great. So I loved that book, and I'm glad you put it out there. And I'm glad it got a bit of controversy, and I'm glad people push back because then people are listening, right? People are saying, "Hey, absolutely, yeah." So can you tell me a little bit about the next book you're coming out? Do you have a release date yet? Okay. Me too. Yeah. Looks good. Yeah. Yeah. Goes in here. I don't know what this is. Yeah. 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 Exactly. The mass marketing of guitars and musical things for all levels has kind of got to the point where certain brands have diluted their value based on some of the other products that they have out there. Not to criticize. I have one electric guitar in the house now, man, and it's an Ibanez Geo. Do I care that it's not a top main? No, it's great. It's got wicked little pickups in it. I can twang around on it and sound like a heavy metal god in my earphones. I don't care. But you know what I mean? Like with cooking stuff, I mean, you have bands or sort of brands like Henkel and Groman and all these bigger brands. Some of them are more like, I say, domestic kitchen stuff, and then they get the forged steel Japanese blades. Like the breadth and depth of it is incredible. So is that sort of the principle of the whole book? Is 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 it about the culture of us buying the book, buying like we talked earlier in the program about our first guitars, or is it a mix of all that? Can you share a little bit about it? Cool. Wow. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I love it. Wow. That's hilarious. So they got the photo. That's pretty cool. Well, I'm looking for no, but that's good. You know what? I don't think there's a lot of people that aren't taking that risk to do a niche book because everything, not everything's about numbers, it's about passion, you know what I mean? So that's wonderful. I'm glad you're doing that, man. It's fantastic. Yeah, that's so cool. So what's up next for you beside the books? What's anything on the horizon? Any tour dates coming up? Yeah, that's right. Yes. Amazing. Very cool. Mm. Yes, I'll be there, buddy. Amazing. Amazing. Very cool. I know it's a blur. Sure. Well, you know what? It's a good problem to have, bud. So that's fantastic. I'm glad things are going well for you. Well, listen, man, I want to thank you so much for taking the time. Like I said, time is not something you can get back, and people don't often give it away for free. So thank you very much. I was excited about this, and it's been a fantastic conversation, very knowledgeable, and I learned a lot today as well. Looking forward to your new book, and looking forward to the documentary coming out as well. All right, brother. Thanks, Sean. All the best. Before we wrap up, I want to send a huge thank you to my guest, Sean Kelly, for the insight, the honesty, and for taking us inside a moment in music history that didn't just change rock, it changed the people making it. These kinds of conversations are exactly why I started this podcast, to slow things down, look under the hood, and understand how creative shifts actually happen, not just on stage, but behind the scenes. If you enjoyed this episode, You can find more conversations like this at cheflive.ca, and I'd love for you to follow along on Instagram. You can find me at cheflive, and all things pod related at _backstage_kitchen on Spotify. You can also follow Sean Kelly on Instagram at Sean Kelly Guitar. If you're listening in the Halifax area, make sure you catch Sean Kelly live at Rock the Harbor, happening this summer, August 14th, 15th, and 16th. He's playing with Arron, and he'll be joining the stage with her on Sunday night, August 16th. Tickets are now on sale at rocktheharbor.ca, and if this conversation got you fired up about live music, that's one show you don't want to miss. Thanks for listening. Thanks for supporting the show, and I'll see you next time on The Backstage. I'm Chef Richard Julien, and this was the Backstage Kitchen Podcast.